The rain fell in thick, heavy drops, and the fog covered the road, reducing visibility to just a few meters. The road was empty, only a few traffic lights flickered on the horizon. And the car echoed in the silence, rumbling through the mist and the squeak of the brakes. I'd been driving for hours, tired, trying to find a place to rest. I thought maybe it was time to stop when I saw a sign for a hotel sofa. It was a lonely sign, worn and faded, but it still offered what I needed, a temporary place to stay. I had no expectations, no desire to keep going. The rain was too uncomfortable, and I felt that fatigue had reached its peak. I decided to stop, turn into the driveway, and seek shelter in the hotel. When I got out of the car, the rain splashed in my face, and the wind carried a scent of decay, something damp and musty. The hotel looked abandoned, its wooden door old and brittle. Despite the cold outside, I felt a sense of relief as I stepped inside. As I walked through the door, the lights flickered, giving the hallway an eerie, otherworldly vibe. It wasn't just the dim lighting, the air felt off. In the corner stood a small woman in a faded dress. Her hands were stiff, her face almost ghostly. When I approached the counter, she looked up at me and silently handed me a key. "Room 7, she whispered. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and took the key. Although I didn't have a bad feeling yet, I knew something wasn't right. There was a presence there, something beneath the surface, something waiting to be revealed. The hallway was strange. Not only was it poorly lit, but it had a feeling of emptiness, an oppressive lingering silence. Even my footsteps didn't sound real. As though they weren't truly part of this place. Shadows seemed to move with me, and at the end of the hall stood the door to room 7. I tried not to think too much about it. I convinced myself the hotel was just old, that the age gave it charm, but I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. The room wasn't large, but it was old-fashioned. The bed was covered with a blanket the color of faded moss, and the air smelled of mildew, slightly damp and decayed. But the most curious thing was the old painting on the wall, depicting city streets that didn't exist, just buildings in black and shadowy surroundings. I went to the window and looked out into the fog. Nothing was visible. The rain just kept falling. Then I noticed something odd on the table. Old papers with no apparent signs of use. I tried to ignore them and lay down on the bed, but I was soon woken by strange sounds. I heard them. At first they were just faint footsteps, like someone walking up and down, then they turned into knocks. It was an unnerving sound, tapping, but with a strange resonance I couldn't quite place. The noise was coming from the hallway. I tried to close my eyes and ignore it, but the feeling of being watched, of not being alone became unbearable. I tried to stand up, but every time I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Then it started again, creaking floorboards, soft tapping. The air in the room was cold, as if I weren't even in it. Though I thought I could endure it, I couldn't deny that something was wrong. During these unsettling moments, I kept glancing at the painting on the wall. The city in the painting was dark, the buildings twisted, and behind them was something. Something unclear, dark. It seemed like the shadows in the background were alive. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I could feel it staring at me. At that moment, the painting wasn't just art, it was a message. A message I couldn't decode. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps. They were getting closer to my door. I knew what was coming. I opened the door and saw her, the woman who had been at the reception. Now, she stood right outside my room, and there was no sound, just her whispering. "Room 7, she said. Her pale smile was unsettling. Something was off about her. Though I wanted to say something, I couldn't find the words. The moment I looked into her eyes, I felt cold. She vanished from my sight as quickly as she had appeared. But something remained in the room, an unsettling feeling. Even though the rain was still falling outside, the room was eerily silent. And when I say silent, I mean the kind of silence that feels almost unnatural. There were only creaking sounds, and then nothing. Pebbles fell to the floor with a faint, uncertain step. My heart wasn't beating normally, like my whole body was out of sync. I sat on the bed, trying to reason with myself. How could a hotel like this make me feel so unsettled? The floorboards were creaking, the cold drafts moved in unpredictable directions, and yet I couldn't ignore that something was lurking, something was waiting. One of those footsteps from the hallway woke me again. Though everything was still, the steps were getting clearer. They were heavy, like someone was carrying a burden. Step, pause, step, silence, step. And all of this coming from the hallway outside my door. By then, I was certain there was no one out there. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore it. But I could still feel it creeping closer. I heard knocking at the door. I didn't move. The cold outside was biting and the air inside was heavy. It wasn't loud, just a light tap, but it was enough to unnerve me. When I opened the door, no one was there. The sounds continued, but this time, they were different. Louder, more insistent. It felt like whatever was out there was trying to get in. I quickly shut the door again, but the feeling remained. I wasn't alone. During these uneasy moments, my eyes always wandered back to the painting. The city on it was familiar, but something was wrong. The buildings leaned, the sky was pitch black, and behind them, there was something. Something I couldn't quite grasp. The longer I looked, the more I felt like I was being pulled into it. Like the painting wasn't just a piece of art, but a portal to something else. The shadows in the picture weren't just shadows, they were eyes, watching me. I've never been fond of silence, but now, every shadow in the room seemed to have weight. My thoughts were scattered, as if I were caught in a whirlwind of confusion. Then came the moment when I remembered every detail of the hotel. The creaky floorboards, the cold drafts, the strange noises. But the worst part was the sense that I wasn't alone. Maybe I was just overly scared. Maybe it was just my imagination. But the feeling that something was always nearby never left me. Then I noticed it. The painting was alive. The eyes were following me, and I felt myself spiraling deeper into the room. I didn't know if I could ever leave. The air in the room became even colder. Every movement felt slower, like someone or something was trying to keep me in place. There was a strange energy that seemed to press against me. Through the window, snowflakes began to fall. But inside, there was only the cold. The suffocating cold. I couldn't stop looking at the painting. It began to creak as if the frame were moving. The floorboards underneath me shifted and I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. It was as if the walls were closing in and there was no escape. Then I realized what I hadn't noticed before. Beneath the room, in the basement, there were sounds. It wasn't silence. I saw a black hole in the floor leading downward. I stared at it for a few moments before I felt a sharp pull toward it. I could feel something growing in the air, as if it were something alive. I reached down and found a small drawer in the table. Inside was a collection of old papers, bound by a leather strap. They weren't addressed to anyone, just a few words written on a piece of paper. "Don't open the door 7. I shuddered as I realized what it meant. Who wrote this? And why? Though I knew I needed to leave, the room felt smaller by the second. It felt like the walls were pushing against me. The door refused to open and the air became heavier. It was as if the room was alive, keeping me trapped. I couldn't breathe. The door wouldn't budge. I had the key in my hand, but it seemed useless. The room was alive, the walls closing in. I could feel the presence moving closer, getting more aggressive. But I couldn't escape. There was no way out. Then, it started again. The creaking. This time, it was louder, like an old wooden chair being dragged across the floor. It was coming from all sides, and no matter where I turned, it was there. I tried to open the door, but it barely moved. The pressure in the room was becoming unbearable. I could feel it, the energy closing in on me. I tried to breathe, but my lungs felt heavy. I wasn't sure if I was in my body anymore, or if I was being pulled somewhere else. There was only the sound, and the feeling that I was not alone. Then I turned to the closet. It wasn't just any closet, it was something from another time. The wood was warped, the handle cold to the touch. I opened it slowly, and there was nothing inside but old fabric and dust-covered objects. But at the bottom I found something. A book. It was heavy, black, and bound in worn leather. I pulled it out. It was ancient. The pages were covered with handwritten notes, rituals, descriptions of things I couldn't understand. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just a book. It was a guide to something dark, and it wanted me to read it. I found myself standing in front of the door again. It wouldn't open. I could feel the pressure building. The room was shrinking, the air getting heavier. I could see the shadows moving, but they didn't belong to me. The door seemed to have a life of its own. It didn't want me to leave. Every attempt to open it was met with resistance. I could hear the tapping again, louder, like fingers drumming on the wood. And still, the door wouldn't open. There was no way out. Then, on the wall behind the table, I saw them. Eyes. Empty. Dark eyes. At first, there was just one. But then more appeared. They were in the painting. They were watching me. Moving with me. I didn't know what they were. But I knew they weren't part of the painting. They were something else. Something darker. At that moment, I realized what I had missed. The hole in the floor. The sounds from below. It wasn't just a basement. It was something else. The room had a secret. It was alive and it wasn't going to let me leave. I could feel the darkness closing in. There was no escape. No way out. The hotel wasn't just a building. It was something living. Something watching. And I was trapped inside it. I wasn't sure if I could ever leave. But I knew one thing for sure, whatever it was that had brought me here, it wouldn't let me go. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to the Fear Factory channel. See you soon.